So last year, we also had a seminar related to finance and accounting, and it was presented by Darren. Now, Darren's here with us today. If Darren would like to just stand up and say hello. So
Hi.
Darren from Benjamin King Money, the DFK Benjamin King Money, is the accountants that the AOMC uses to help us with our finances. So Darren did a presentation on accounting and taxation for clubs. And if you missed it, we do have the PDF of that presentation on our website. And if you go through it, you'll find it's a very good summary of the background that we need, particularly for today's seminar. So today continues on from that theme. So that discussion last year was on the basics, finance and accounting, the requirements for ABNs, GST reporting, taxation, income tax reporting, if it was all relevant. It talked about the mutuality principle to determine whether the income and expenses that you've got are related to income tax. And it spoke about some announcements from the ATO about changes that they were going to make in 12 months' time. Well, now 12 months is up. We're almost there. 1st of July, they kick in. And the last part of that presentation was a bit about what do we need to do next to be ready for that. So 12 months has now elapsed, and we've been encouraging clubs in our magazine over the last 12 months to try and get ready to understand what it's about. Now, I don't want to go into the details about it because that's what our next guest speaker is going to do. But if you do need to get involved in taxation issues, which is what you will find out about again today, then, and if it was obvious that you would, then maybe some preparation prior to this point will help. But we'll go through those issues today in our next presentation. Now, Darryl's not presenting today, so I would refer you back to the presentation from last year. It's still relevant. So we'll share that with you when this seminar is over. Sometime next week, we'll send out another communication with information about how you can access the presentations that we're on today as recordings and as PDFs, but also refer you back to last year's seminar because it is still very relevant to what we're talking about today. Now, after the presentation that we've got up next, we'll then follow that with a panel discussion. Panel discussion will include both Darren, it'll include Keith, who did our risk management session. It will include our next presenter, Jennifer Moltisanti, and then I will lead that. So that's the panel discussion. But let's get into the next topic, which I know a lot of you have a lot of interest in at the moment, whether it be nervous interest or just it being intrigued about taxation and the impacts that might have on car clubs, who of course are classified in most cases as not-for-profits. So I'd like to welcome Jennifer Moltisanti, standing over here, to do our next presentation. Jennifer is an assistant commissioner at the Australian Tax Office, so we are very privileged to have her here. Her area of responsibility includes not-for-profits, includes other things like government relations and other things, which I'm sure she'll tell us about. But she has a big interest in the taxation framework for not-for-profits, which is the space that we sit in. Now, I know she's been very keen to present. She had opportunity to hand over to somebody else at the tax office, but she was keen to come along today, which we feel very honoured to have her here. Now, if anybody's been following the messages we've had throughout the year, where we encourage you to try and get informed about the changes that are coming on taxation, there were some invites there to subscribe to the communications from the tax office, from the not-for-profit segment. which Jennifer heads up and has been responsible for putting out those communications, and on a regular basis puts out a message called Direct from the Source, which has been explaining the process they've been going through for the last 12 months so that they're ready to tell us what to do by the 1st of July this year. So I've learned by reading those that her interest is in trying to help clubs like ours. It's not just a case of, well, here's a rule, suck it up, deal with it. She's been very passionate about making sure that not-for-profits come along on the journey with a minimum amount of stress or no stress if it's not appropriate. So I'd like to welcome Jennifer to tell us a little bit more about taxation.
Well, good morning. What a group. I am so encouraged and very honoured to be here this morning. And thank you so much, Mark, Keith and Ken, for inviting me. Now, before I do begin, and as is customary, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet. Today, I'm joining you on the lands of the Wurundjeri Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, who have been the traditional owners and custodians of these lands for tens of thousands of years. And so I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that may be joining this meeting today, or indeed may be joining online as well. And good morning also to all the members that are online. Now, Mark has indicated that we do have a slide deck, which I will go through, but I won't go through every single slide. But rest assured that that slide deck will be made available to you, and everything that is in that slide deck you can rely on. So it's yours to keep, to tear and share. So if there's a particular slide that you really like and would like to share with your clubs, you can tear it out and share it with them. That's what the slide deck has been designed for. So it's yours to use with confidence. So just a little bit about myself. So as Mark indicated, I'm an assistant commissioner with the ATO. I've been in the ATO for about just over 20 years now, and I have a very strong background in not-for-profits, having pretty much done a lot of fundraising and been on the board as a director of many not-for-profit organisations. But about 4.5 years ago, the Commissioner asked me to lead the ATO's not-for-profit centre. So I've been in this role for the last 4.5 years. And over that time, the government, both the previous government and the current government, their interest has been in ensuring that we have appropriate transparency and integrity of a really important sector in the Australian economy. So many of the things that we have been doing and introducing is to ensure that we have that appropriate transparency and integrity in the sector. Now, it's really interesting because when I came into the not-for-profit sector, it is probably the only sector that I have been in, and I've worked in large markets, small business, private groups, all of those areas from a compliance perspective. But it's the only sector that I've noticed are really risk averse. They want to get it right? So all not-for-profits actually want to get it right. So when we introduced these new reporting obligations, they were actually embraced by the sector. And I have been really heartened by clubs such as yourselves who have partnered with us and wanted to work with us to ensure that they get it right going forward. So hopefully, once we've gone through today's discussion, you'll have a little bit more confidence that we're here to help you, that we will hold your hand in getting it right, and that there's nothing to fear about the ATO. Now, there is only 8 days to tax time. Obviously, if you're still lodging your tax returns, you need to make sure that you've got your affairs in order. But for not-for-profits that are self-assessing as income tax exempt, this is a new major reporting obligation. Now, what I can say right from the get-go is that most of you will not be lodging this particular return because you're probably going to be in that taxable not-for-profit realm. but we will go through that. So if I could start, Mark, we might just go straight into the slide deck, and I'll just explain my role. So my team is a relatively small team. I've got a team in Parramatta in Sydney. They are the ones that provide our advice and endorsement role for the ATO. So if you're applying for tax concessions, that's the team that you will speak to. We have a dedicated phone line. That's the team that will pick up your telephone call and give you any advice as well. That's a 1300 number. So it's not the normal, general call line. So it's not the general ATO call line. Because not-for-profits are so important and so nuanced, I suppose, and special, we have a dedicated phone line just for not-for-profits, and my team specialise just in not-for-profit advice. And at the back of the presentation, you will have all of those contact details, including that particular phone line as well. So this is just a little bit about our role. So obviously, we look after all not-for-profits in the tax system, as well as charities from a tax and super perspective. Now, I suppose contrary to popular belief, most people think not-for-profits, they're exempt all tax, there's not much to see. But when I switch to the next slide, you will see that there's actually a lot to see, because not-for-profits actually employ about 10% of Australia's workforce. So these are not volunteers, these are actually employees. And so not-for-profits have really significant tax obligations from an employer perspective, and super also. But our role is really to support not-for-profits to meet all of their obligations. And we do this by all of the advice that we provide to not-for-profits. A lot of that advice you'll see on our website, but also through the telephone service that we provide. And as Mark referred to earlier, we have a not-for-profit newsroom, and a lot of our key messages are actually provided through there. Can I just get a show of hands? Does anyone have LinkedIn? Anyone? Okay. Anyone following LinkedIn? Right. So a really good idea after this session to maybe go onto LinkedIn, consider getting onto LinkedIn, because we are using that social channel to actually push messages forward. So you will often see a lot of the messages from, that are pertaining to not-for-profits getting pushed out through that social channel as well. So in addition to providing support to the not-for-profit sector in meeting its obligations, we also have a role to the government and the community. Not-for-profits are in a really privileged position because they have significant tax concessions in the system. And so one of our roles as administrator is to ensure that only eligible not-for-profits are accessing those significant tax concessions. So that is a role that we take quite seriously. It is a role that the community expects us to take quite seriously. So at the end of the day, as the representative for the tax office, I need to put my hand on my heart and say to the government and the community, yes, we know that all not-for-profits are meeting their tax and super obligations because this is what we have done and this is what they are doing. So there's a lot of work that we do in the background to ensure that not-for-profits are actually compliant with all of their obligations. So that just gives you a little bit of a background into our role. But it's the next slide, and I know that it's really small and you probably can't see the finer detail, but bear with me. There are about 224,000 not-for-profits that are registered in the tax system with an ABN. So can I get a show of hands? Does everyone here have an ABN? And maybe, does anyone not have an ABN? Ah, interesting. So if you don't have an ABN and you're not required to have an ABN, you could probably leave now, but I don't want you to leave now because it's pretty interesting what I'm going to say. But the new reporting requirements only apply to those not-for-profits that have an ABN and are required to have an ABN. So that's an important point there. But let's talk about this 224,000 that are registered in the system with an ABN. This 224,000 splits into 3 groups, and it's really important to understand this. About 26%, or just over 57,000, are registered charities. So these are a special group of not-for-profits that have charitable purposes, and they're registered as a charity with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. So they are the regulator for charities. So if you have a charitable purpose and you'd like to access income tax exemption, you must be registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission and meet all of their internal and external governance standards. You also have to lodge an annual information statement every year to maintain that registration with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. Now, we work closely with the ACNC, that's the acronym for the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, because whilst they're responsible for the regulation of charities, we are responsible for all of their tax and super obligations. So registered charities also employ a lot of employees. They have significant tax and super obligations. So in order to get deductible gift recipient status, an organisation must be registered with the Australian Charities Commission, and so then they apply for that status from the ATO. And for those of you that may not know what a deductible gift recipient is, it's a not-for-profit that is allowed to accept donations from donors that are tax deductible to that organisation. So obviously at tax time, we get a lot of DGRs coming out of the woodwork. And indeed, I checked with the team in Sydney yesterday, and of course, they've had quite an increase in DGR applications over the last few weeks. So about a third of the population, or just over a quarter of the population, are registered charities. Then you have about 4% of the population that are taxable not-for-profits, and this is probably where your clubs, sit, given the purposes of the club itself. So 4% of not-for-profits actually lodge income tax returns or returns not necessary, and we'll go through those in a few slides. And then the vast majority of not-for-profits, about 155,000 or 70% of the population, are what we call self-assessing income tax exempt. They have always been self-assessing income tax exempt. What I will say right from the get-go is that the law hasn't changed. The law has always been the same. What is changing is the reporting of entitlement to that self-assessing income tax exempt category. So the law has not changed. The law has always been the same. So you can read this at your leisure, but you can see there, if you can see the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there are a lot of figures there that go into the millions and billions, just highlighting how much money is actually flowing through the not-for-profit sector itself. So it is quite a significant sector for the Australian economy. If you are not aware, there are a number of regulators and administrators of the not-for-profit sector. And so obviously I've already met, we're there, but also the ACNC, which is the second one, but also ASIC, you've got ORIC for Indigenous organisations, but also at the state and territory level, you have a number of regulators and administrators for not-for-profits as well. So the next couple of slides really go to the heart of tax and super obligations. So if you are a taxable not-for-profit, you can actually see that you've got pay-as-you-go withholding, single touch payroll, fringe benefit tax and superannuation obligations that you may need to report to the ATO. If you are a not-for-profit that has turnover greater than 150,000, you also must be registered in the GST system and lodge a BAS. Now, many not-for-profits, even if they're under that threshold, choose to register, for GST, just so that they can claim their input tax credits back, and that's fine as well. So they can be registered in the system. And there are over 60,000 not-for-profits that are registered in the GST system. The next slide we can slip because it really just goes to the heart of the fact that if you are a registered charity with charitable purposes and you're registered with the ACNC, you need to meet all of the obligations with the ACNC, as well as the obligations that you have to the tax office. And you can see there that we highlight governance. And so I was particularly pleased this morning hearing Keith's focus on risk assessment, risk management and governance, which is so important for all organisations. So let's start getting down into the crux of things. Whenever I'm doing these sorts of presentations, and indeed, even when I'm out, when people finally find out what I do, because I don't often admit to working for the tax office, when they finally find out what I actually do, they sort of like scratch their head and they go, so what are you interested in, right? So this slide here actually summarizes what attracts our attention. There is a lot of detail on here, and I'm sure that you will be able to see yourselves here, but there are 4 key areas that we focus on. The first one is operating for purpose. If you're a not-for-profit, it is all about your purpose, irrespective of whether you're a charitable, taxable, or a self-assessing not-for-profit. It is all about your purpose. And your purpose needs to be reflected in your governing documents, and the activities that you undertake as an organisation have to be consistent with that purpose. Now, interestingly, when I started in the not-for-profit sector, because there were so many myths around, not only in the community, but also in the ATO, right? Like, so a lot of people in the ATO just didn't understand the whole not-for-profit landscape. And so we enlisted an independent researcher to find out sector understood about itself. So when they were asked, do you have governing documents? Many of them said no. Many of them said, well, yeah, we had them 20 years ago, but we haven't reviewed them. And a lot of them indicated that their activities had changed quite significantly from when the not-for-profit had been established, many years ago. So one of the key things for all not-for-profits is to ensure that your governing documents are up to date. And as part of a good governance process, you should be reviewing purpose activities, your documents, and that all of your details are up to date. I would say at least annually, if not on a biannual perspective. So purpose, very, very important. The second area of interest are private and public ancillary funds. These are like trusts. And so these ancillary funds are established with the sole purpose of distributing to other not-for-profits, right? And so often we see there are public ancillary funds as well as private ancillary funds. They have particular guidelines and they need to be met. So that is a big focus of our attention. The third area you can see there on the screen is that self-assessing income tax exempt category. The reason that this is a significant area for us and attracting our attention is because, again, going back to that research that we did, what we found was that of the 155,000, not all of them are entitled to that exemption. In fact, what we knew even before we did the independent research was that there were a lot of taxable organisations in there who just assumed that because they were a not-for-profit, they were exempt all taxes. We also had some organisations in there that had charitable purposes and probably should have been registered with the ACNC in order to access income tax exemptions. So, and many not-for-profits didn't actually even know which category they belonged to. They didn't even know that there were 8 categories in the tax law that they needed to self-assess as income tax exempt against. So, big focus on that. And if you have been reading my columns on a monthly basis, and I know Mark has been reading them, you will note that we are starting to refer to the new reporting obligations as the Great Reset. And really what we're saying to the not-for-profit sector, there is no need to be afraid here. This is an opportunity to review your purpose, review all of your obligations and get it right going forward. I'm often asked, Jennifer, is this being driven by revenue? And I can say that this is not being driven by revenue. It's being driven by transparency and integrity and making sure that only those that are entitled to that tax concession are actually accessing that tax concession. So it is an opportunity for all not-for-profits to get it right going forward. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can see there that there are some emerging risks. So unless you're large-ish not-for-profit that is involved in structuring and GST reporting and commercial activities, it's probably not something that you need to turn your mind to. The last dot point there on the emerging risks is rising debt levels. And I will call this one out because it applies, beyond the not-for-profit sector. We're living in some really tough sort of economic conditions, and I know that lots of organisations are really struggling to meet their obligations. What I will say, and having worked in our debt areas in the ATO, is I know that sometimes it can be daunting to ask for help, but please pick up the phone and get that help sooner rather than later, because there is a lot that we can do to assist an organisation to get back on track. So if you are a not-for-profit that does have, debt that you're struggling to meet, please ensure that you contact the ATO. Also, if any of your friends or colleagues are experiencing trouble meeting their tax and super obligations, please ask them, say, look, I met Jennifer, she seems pretty reasonable. So you can contact the ATO. They will help you get back on track. To supplement what Keith no doubt has taken you through both last year and this year, this next slide really goes to what not-for-profits can actually do to improve assurance and ensure that they're meeting all of their obligations. Again, you can read this at your leisure, but I will highlight right at the top, keeping good records. It really is all about keeping good records. And one of the other questions that I often get is, well, what does best practice look like for not-for-profits? Now, this is really difficult to answer because in the not-for-profit sector, it's quite unique in that it spans all sizes and types of organisations. So at the very top, we have not-for-profits that employ more than 5,000 organisations, have international dealings, commercial dealings, and at the bottom, we have not-for-profits who, have 10 members, for example. So it's really difficult to say, well, everyone should have, this is what Gold Star looks like. What I will say, and it probably complements what Keith said earlier this morning, is that your governance needs to be commensurate to the size and the operations that you have as a not-for-profit. And also you can see there that, we do also focus on the risk posture that an organisation has. And I'm happy to say that given the work that this group has done over many, many years, you seem to have a really good risk posture. You're certainly not, putting your head in the sand and sort of saying it doesn't apply to me. You're being really proactive about finding out what these new reporting requirements mean for you and what you need to do. So that's just, some tips on what you can do to improve assurance. We also send out a lot of signals to market. So this slide here is really about just sending out these signals to market. So if you are the recipient of tax concessions and endorsements, make sure, review annually that you are still entitled to them because they are contingent on the activities and purposes that you have as an organisation. Secondly, check your obligations regularly. It's important that you do this on an annual basis. Also, if you have employees, are you meeting all of those obligations? Do you need to be registered for GST? If you are registered for GST, are your bad lodgements up to date? And I would like to point out as well that not-for-profits are selected for our random inquiry program. So it's not like we have, so generally speaking, we have, we take the approach of working with the not-for-profit sector to ensure that they're meeting all of their obligations. But sometimes we do have not-for-profits that get caught up in our random inquiry programs and may be selected for a review or audit. So you can be caught up in those sorts of programs as well. So let's move then to the new reporting requirements. Look, I will just say here, for those that are really interested in the tax law, the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997, Division 50 of that Act, and it's quite a big Act. It has there are 8 categories in there, and they have specific criteria that self-assessing income tax exempt organisations need to meet. Now, as I said earlier, it does not apply to not-for-profits that are registered with the ACNC as a charity. It does not apply to taxable not-for-profits, which most of you are. It only applies to those not-for-profits that have an ADN and meet the requirements of that actual criteria in Division 50 of the tax law. And on this slide, you can see that there are a lot of links to our web pages which explain that in a lot more detail. So what do those categories actually look like? So you can see here that we've taken the figures that I gave you at the beginning. So we start with that 224,000 that are registered in the tax system. And you can see you're down the bottom there as a taxable not-for-profit. So you're not caught up in these new reporting requirements. So let's look at the 155,000 that are caught up in the new reporting requirements. And you can see there that the 8 categories, we've listed them: community service, sporting, cultural, educational, health, employment, scientific, and resource development. Now, when in preparing for this and having had a conversation with Mark several times, there was potential for, I have been asked, well, why doesn't this group fit into, say, one of those categories? So there are potentially 2 categories that it could have fit into. One would have been community services, the other one sporting. But in fact, you'll see in a couple of slides that to fit the sporting category, your organisation's main purpose must be the encouragement of a game or sport, and that includes animal racing. And so unless your purpose is to encourage a game or a sport, you can't fit into that category. Similarly, community service, to meet that category, your main purpose must be community services. And so any other purpose that you've got has to be incidental to that community service purpose. And when you think about community services, they're altruistic in nature, which means that the services provided by the not-for-profit are for the health and well-being of others, right? So when you actually, if you do have an opportunity to go into the criteria of these categories, you'll see that you immediately will fall out. And then the others just wouldn't apply, even just looking at them from that perspective. So that gives you an idea of what the categories look like. We'll really whiz through the next couple of slides because they won't apply to many of you. I think I'm struggling. Maybe the next slide, Mark. The next slide, once we get to it. Sorry, Mark, I'll get some.
I'll go for that one, but I don't know why that's stopped.
So in essence, if the slide prior to this one really just went to the heart of the return. So Mark indicated at the beginning that we've been working with the sector for about 18 months now on developing the annual reporting return. It is a really simple return. And it has 3 sections: organisation details. Then it asks you which category are you self-assessing as income tax exempt against, and then it has a declaration. We've worked with the sector to develop that return. It has tested very well, and it only takes about 10 minutes to complete using online services for business, or if you have a registered tax agent, an agent can also lodge it on your behalf. In this first year, because we know that it's going to be difficult for many not-for-profits that have never had to report this stuff before to the ATO, we are also making an alternative lodgement channel available, which means that they will be able to call a telephone number that we will issue to market in the next couple of weeks, and they'll be able to lodge it using the telephone service, which says, press 1 if you want to lodge it, type in your ABN, and so on and so forth. So let's move then to taxable not-for-profits. So as I indicated before, not all not-for-profits are exempt from income tax at all. So in order to be income tax exempt, you need to meet, the conditions that are outlined in Division 50 of the tax law. And so to give you an example, and so if you're not, there are two pathways. To be income tax exempt, you either meet one of the 8 categories in Division 50 of the tax law, or you have charitable purposes and you're registered with the ACNC as a charity. They are the only 2 pathways to income tax exemption. If you do not meet one of those 2 pathways, you are taxable. So you are a taxable not-for-profit. Doesn't mean that you lose your not-for-profit status, but you are a taxable not-for-profit. So let's have a look at what are some of the examples of taxable not-for-profits. Well, many of you are taxable not-for-profits, but social groups and clubs whose main purpose is to provide hospitality service to members, taxable not-for-profits. Clubs that promote public speaking or debating, taxable. Clubs that promote an interest in vintage cars, we put that in there for you guys, taxable. Chambers of commerce, professional associations, political parties, they are all taxable not-for-profits. So really important to sort of, highlight that. So what do taxable not-for-profits need to lodge? So again, there is this common myth that if I am a not-for-profit, irrespective of whether I'm taxable or not, I don't need to lodge anything. Well, that's not quite right. So if you are a taxable not-for-profit, you need to lodge an income tax return or a return not necessary. And so you need to work out what your taxable income is. If you are a not-for-profit, and really the simplest way to describe this, because I know that you had a session on mutuality last year, but the simplest way to describe this is, if you are a not-for-profit, you need to think about not only your purpose, but where is your income being derived from? So if you're a taxable not-for-profit, one of the first questions that you need to ask yourself is, where is my income coming from? So is my income coming all from members? Or is my income coming from members as well as non-members? And is my income coming from investments that I hold? Or when I hire out the hall for someone's 21st, am I getting income from that? Do I have, investments in the bank? Am I getting interest on that? So you need to work out where your income is coming from. Now, I know I'm simplifying this, but for the purposes of this example, it's probably the best way to do it. Once you've worked out where your income is coming from, if you have taxable income that is greater than $416, you will be required to lodge an income tax return. If your taxable income is less than $416, you'll need to lodge a return not necessary, which basically is a declaration that your income is less than $416 and therefore you do not need to lodge an income tax return. At the moment, you need to write to us to tell us that. You need to find the address and all of that, but we are going to make it easier. We're working on a pro forma, which I will share, Mark, at a later date, that if you do have income that's less than $416, you'll be able to quickly complete that and send it in to us. Now, it is important for those taxable not-for-profits that have income less than $416 that they do notify us that they're not required to lodge, because if you don't, you will get failure to lodge penalties. And so you will start receiving those letters from the ATO saying, oh, we've noticed you haven't lodged your income tax return, and so they'll start hitting you with failure to lodge penalties. Now, one of the questions are, Jennifer, we've just realised that we've been self-assessing as income tax exempt, but we should have been taxable. Are we going to be hit with penalties? No, you're not going to be hit with penalties. I mentioned at the beginning that this new reporting requirement is not being driven by revenue. It's being driven by transparency and integrity And so we have made a commitment, at least in the next, in the interim years until we bed this new reporting requirement down, that we will apply a practical compliance approach, which means that we will focus our attention on the 23-24 financial years going forward. So it means it is an opportunity for you to get your house in order and meet your obligations going forward. So if you have been, self-assessing as income tax exempt, but you should have been taxable, we really want you to focus on getting it right going forward. Now, I say that, but if there is fraud or evasion, all bets are off, right? So I will say that. So it is important to sort of understand, where your income is coming from and working out what your taxable income is, and then, knowing whether to lodge an income tax return or a return not necessary. A lot of not-for-profits have sort of asked us as well, do I need a tax agent? Like, we're all volunteers. We don't know how to do this, right? Do I need to get a tax agent or a BAS agent? Well, if you are a self-assessing income tax exempt organisation and subject to the new reporting requirements, what I can say is that whilst it is a return that you need to lodge to the ATO, it's not a financial return. For taxable not-for-profits, it's a little bit different, because if you do have income, if you have taxable income greater than $416, you're actually lodging an income tax return with financials to the ATO. Now, depending on the complexity of your organisation and the complexity of your financials, you may want to engage the services of a tax agent. But before you do that, I would suggest that you have a really good look at the guidance that we have on our web pages, because we review that regularly and we try and make it as easy as possible for not-for-profits to understand that web guidance. And I can say that because incrementally over the last 4 years, we've been updating all of our web pages, and I go through all of them. If it doesn't make sense to me, it doesn't get published. So if you do find that there's stuff on our web that doesn't make sense to you, please bring it to our attention, because that guidance is there for you to make the decisions that you need to make to ensure that you're meeting your obligations. And the other thing is that we do have a mutuality guide on our web pages. It is pretty comprehensive and has a lot of examples that show you how to calculate your taxable income. In addition to that, who would have ever thought the ATO has a TV channel? It's only on our web pages, so it doesn't compete with Netflix, but we do have a TV channel, nonetheless, and we have recorded 3 webinars. The first webinar is how to go about becoming digital ready. So for those of you that have not linked your organisation's ABN in Relationship Authorisation Manager to get access to online services for business, I can't believe I actually remember all of that. For those of you that haven't done that, we've got a how-to section in that webinar, and it steps you through everything that you need to do. It also steps you through how to, link to online services for business so that you can get ready to lodge not only this new reporting requirement, but also an income tax return if you are a taxable not-for-profit. So that first webinar gives you that how-to step, and also gives you an overview of the new reporting requirements. Second webinar looks at charitable purposes, but the third webinar is probably the one that is most pertinent to this group. That's the taxable webinar. And there in that webinar, we actually go through some of the examples on how to calculate your taxable income. And the actual presentation itself is really fantastic, and happy to share that with you as well if anyone has an interest. So with the due dates, how and when to lodge or to notify, Obviously, income tax returns are generally due by the 31st of October each year. That's not new. Taxable not-for-profits actually do have access to concessional due dates of lodgement. So taxable not-for-profits need to lodge their tax returns by the 15th of May 2025. So that is something that many not-for-profits may not know. Additionally, we have a lot of not-for-profits that have substituted accounting periods or SAPs for income tax purposes. They will have a different due date. So if you do have a substituted accounting period, go to our website for the latest information, but you do need to be approved by us to have a substituted accounting period. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see there that if you are informing us or notifying us of a return not necessary, that is all of the information that you need to provide to us. So you need to just provide us a letter that says, this is who I am, this is our ADN, this is our authorised contact name and phone number, email and postal addresses, and just advising us that the return is not necessary. But we are making that available in a pro forma, so watch this space and follow my socials because we will be announcing that soon. Next slide just really shows you what our website looks like. So we've recently updated all of our web guidance. It's very supposed to be quite intuitive. So I'm hoping that if you have had an opportunity to go into our website, that you've had a positive experience. Next few slides really go through what the return will look like. So we'll go through all of those. Supporting transition. This slide here really indicates what we've done to actually support transition to the new reporting requirements and the reset that we're going to see in the population. So of that 155,000 that are currently self-assessing as income tax exempt, I mentioned earlier that we knew that in that population, there are some that should be charitable, many that should be taxable. So that 155,000 population is going to split once again, because there's going to be some that start registering with the ACNC and some that are going to be taxable and start lodging an income tax return or that return not necessary. So this is what we've done to support that transition. And the 4 key things that we're asking everyone to do is really update your primary contact details and ABN registration details with the ATO. Now, it is an ADR legislative requirement that when you have a significant change in your organisation, you need to be updating your details, but many not-for-profits just don't get to it and haven't done it. And it is really, really important to do that. So please do that. We often hear, oh, I have no idea who the authorised contact is, or that person might be deceased. And then when you go to our website, the form that asks you to make those change of registration details requires the authorised contact to do that. So we've made that form easier for you to access. So if you don't know who your authorised contact is, if you have been authorised as a contact by your organisation, and you have evidence of that, which might be the minutes of an AGM or the minutes of a special meeting, attach that to the back of that form, and we will update your details accordingly. Getting digital ready, so setting up your MyGov ID and online services for business, really important if you're going to be lodging an income tax return. I mentioned earlier reviewing eligibility. So for this group, just making sure that you're meeting all of your obligations, reviewing your governing documents, purposes, activities, and keeping informed, that becomes quite important. There's been a lot of key correspondence and guidance that has been sent out to not-for-profits. Can I get an indication of hands? Has anyone in this group received a letter from the ATO advising them of the new reporting requirements? Yeah, a few. Excellent. So that's because you would have been caught up in that self-assessing income tax exempt population. And so if you have been caught up in that letter, I mean, obviously, you know that you're probably going to be taxable, and so you're going to have to lodge a return not necessary or an income tax return. But you can also, if you do want to, you can also complete that return, the new return. And when it asks you which category are you self-assessing as income tax exempt, you'll have to say, well, I don't meet any of those. And then what we do is we capture you there. So we don't jail you or anything. We just capture you. And then we will work with you to transition you to the appropriate reporting regime that applies to you. So there are a lot of organisations that are perhaps not as organised as yourselves that will be completing that return, even though they don't meet one of the 8 categories. And we're basically saying to them, don't worry, complete it. We'll work with you to get it right going forward. That's that registration. This is an important registration form. So this slide is probably quite important. It's called the NAP 2943 form. So if you do need to update your registration details with the ATO, this is the form that you need. You don't have to order it. You don't have to call us and order it anymore. You can go to our web pages, download it, complete it, and send it in to us, and we will update your details. Now, ordinarily, it would only take us about 28 days to update your details, but at the moment, and especially because we're going into tax time, it is taking us a little bit longer. It can take 2, even 3 months. So don't fret. If you've lodged this update form with us and you haven't heard from us, don't call us because we're being inundated in the call centres. We will contact you. We will confirm with you once your details have been updated. I've already mentioned the transitional support arrangements. So again, I want everyone to just, really understand that, there's nothing to fear here. We, in the transitional years, while we bed down the new reporting requirements, we are taking very much a practical compliance approach. We will be holding your hands to get it right going forward. So there is nothing to fear unless you've been participating in evasion and fraud. And I'm hoping that no one here will fall into that category. If a taxable not-for-profit can't be a deductible gift recipient because you have to be a registered charity to have deductible gift recipient status, but if you're interested in it, you can read about all the things that are happening there. I mentioned our public advice and guidance, so that gives you an overview of what we're doing there. We do also provide quite a lot of support for our Indigenous not-for-profits, and I work very closely with Patricia Stroud from Oregon. And this is probably the most important slide because it has all of our contact details, including that 1300 number that I mentioned, and all of the links on our website with all of the important information, including the ATO TV channel. So that's really, that really brings us to an end with respect to what I wanted to go through today. And I know that you probably have quite a number of questions, and we are going to have a panel. So Mark, I might hand back over to you.
Mark, do you want the screen up?
Yes, so we'll do a transition into the panel. But were there any questions that people wanted to direct to Jennifer right now before we start with the panel discussion? Which the intention of the panel discussion is to get to a situation where we can start to discuss context, discover a little bit about the variation amongst our clubs as to where we actually sit, get advice from others on the panel, like Darren, a little bit more on the accounting side. But everybody smile. Jennifer's taking a selfie here. I'm sure we'll be on social media somewhere. Yeah, so any particular questions related it is, but if they start to stray into more general things, then maybe we'll get.
See, Ken wants to ask a question. That's not fair.
Possibly Dorothy is.
But wait for the microphone, Ken.
Is that through an agent or is that a?
Sorry, say.
Wait for the microphone.
I thought I was loud enough as it was.
Full disclosure, Ken works in the tax office, right? You shouldn't be asking me a
That is
question.
something we do not talk about. The main lodgement day, is that for people who lodge through agents or can people access that without?
No, people can access that.
So it's not for the lodgement day.
Date.
Jenny from the Bland Vintage Machinery Club again, sorry. Our treasurer sadly passed away tragically, and so we were left with not knowing who our contact details were with the ATO. So we followed that procedure. We sent in a form, to and froing. It's been over 12 months and we still have not been able to get our contact details changed. We lodged our minutes of our AGM and no luck.
So Jenny, can I get you to send me an email just with your details, and I'll follow that through on Monday.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Jennifer, Darryl Minterpass Coast. I noticed in your opening sentences that, and this is a generic question, but clubs without an ACN, how are they treated?
Without an ABN? Without an ABN. Back in 2010, the Activity Commission estimated that there were about 600,000 not-for-profits operating in the Australian economy. And so that's what prompted us to do the research that we did. And then what we found was that of that 600,000 that the Productivity Commission identified back in 2010, only 224,000 had an ABN or were required to have an ABN. So that left 400,000, an odd 400,000 out there. About a year and a half ago, we enlisted some further independent research to try and find who these clubs were. What we found is probably that there's not 400,000. The number is probably a little bit less. These are really small clubs. They are not captured in the system as such. So we provide a lot of education and support to those not-for-profits that are not required to have an ABN, Darryl. But they don't need to lodge anything with the ATO.
I find that very difficult.
You find that very difficult?
I do, simply because we as a club, we comply with most of your requirements.
Are you using the microphone, please?
It's back here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he's referring to an ACN, not an ABN.
Thanks, Tony. No, I'm saying to you that our clubs would comply with all your requirements of having an ABN, but we don't have an ABN.
So maybe Darryl will have a chat with you after this and just work out what's going on there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that might also be a question that can come up in the panel of how do clubs get some of the answers that they need, like that. Questions such as, do I actually need an ABN? How do I get that information? So that might be a good one for us to discuss on the panel. So maybe we'll put the panel together. We'll take one more question and then we'll put the panel together. Take a little moment to get that set up, ready to go, and then we'll continue on. But one more question, see how we go.
Well, that was going to be my question. How do you know whether you're required to have an ABN?
So not all organisations are required to have an ABN. So the ABR website actually has quite a lot of information with respect to whether you need to have an ABN or not. So if you are an organisation incorporated, you will require an ABN. If you want to register with the GST system, you'll need an ABN. If you have charitable purposes, you will be required to have an ABN. So there are various reasons why you may legally need to have an ABN. So you need to look at the circumstances of your organisation. So again, remembering your purpose, go back to your purpose and go onto the website and work out whether you need an ABN. A lot of organisations, even not-for-profits, are required to, are required to have an ABN if they open a bank account, right? So if they have a bank account, generally, you may be required to have an ABN. So one of the questions that I often get is, so if only those with an ABN are required to comply with these new reporting requirements, maybe we should go and cancel our ABN. So what I would say is, like, think about whether you should be cancelling your ABN, because there are other reasons why you may be required to have that ABN.